Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Officer Training School. My name is Joshua Joshi Howard, and today we're going to be going over Hellhounds. This one's especially for you, Tomas. Before we go too far, I do want to give a couple of shout-outs to some things that are relevant to the channel. If you're interested in any of the information about how Hellhounds are generally being run and what people are currently running in all of their different lists, make sure you check out the link in the description for the Ko-fi page. Also, we recently unlocked membership, so thank you to everybody who has become a member of the channel. If you want to do so as well, there is a link down in the description that you can check out, as well as just click on all the things that are relevant. If you link up your YouTube account with your Discord account, you can also get access to our members Discord. So let's go ahead and get into what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be talking about pretty much all the normal stuff, the basics, how you generally equip them, the flush them out ability, how efficiently durable this chassis really is, orders and stratagems, and then general strategy. One of the important things that I will kind of note with this one is when I was showing this guide to several of the players that did contribute to it, the kind of general consensus is that Hellhounds are fairly simple vehicles overall. You just kind of need to understand how effective they are at what they do, and once you understand that, you're like, wow, this is pretty good. The Hellhound isn't going to be breaking any new ground in terms of what the guard can do. It just makes a lot of the things that we do better at a very good price. So let's go ahead and talk about the basics of what a Hellhound is. To start off, Hellhounds are almost cheap exterminators. In many ways, they are very close to what an exterminator does for the rest of the army at a significantly reduced price. The second most important thing about Hellhounds is that they don't need orders. You can give orders to them, but you generally don't require them, and it allows you to relieve some of the issues with the order economy that some guard builds will have. Lastly, Hellhounds are very resilient for their points. The fact that it's toughness 10 with a 2+ save means that a lot of armies are going to have trouble really doing damage to it unless you have specific things that are good at taking down tanks or just good at killing everything in the game. So to start off with, you are always going to equip the Inferno Cannon and Hunter Killer Missile. As for what you want to put in the hull, it's going to depend a lot on the terrain you're playing on and the rest of your list, and also the meta that you're playing in. In general, you're going to be wanting to put a Multi-Melta in the hull. The main reason for this is the lethal hits, and the Multi-Melta has almost as many shots as a Bolter, and does way more damage if it actually lands into pretty much every target you can think of. And the main thing that is limiting taking a Multi-Melta every single time is that, depending on what kind of terrain you're playing on, you might have sight lines that are longer than 18 inches, where the Multi-Melta and the Inferno Cannon can reach. So, some players like taking a heavy bolter on terrain with longer sight lines, such as player place terrain or Games Workshop terrain. The Heavy Flamer can be played, especially on WTC, if you don't feel like you need any more anti-tank in your army, and you just need a even stronger Overwatch threat with the extra Heavy Flamer. However, what you'll generally find in most of your games is that once people know that Hellhound has a 2d6 flamer at 621, their chaff is going to avoid it anyway, just because that can obliterate a guardsman squad by itself. So adding an extra heavy flamer on top of that doesn't really help a lot, because you're already creating this 18-inch zone where they don't want to move chaff in. And killing chaff even better within 12 inches is not necessarily going to help your chances a whole lot. Okay, now there are a couple of alternative turrets that you can put on the Hellhound, but you generally don't want to. So the first one, the Bane Wolf, is what it used to be called, the Chem Cannon. It only does slightly more damage, only slightly more damage than Inferno Cannons into most targets that you're going to want to be shooting it into, but you're losing 6 inches of range. And that's a really big deal when the primary function of the Hellhound is to strip cover and be a really durable thing that can sit in the midboard and threaten large areas with Overwatch. The Chem Cannon doesn't really do this for you. Secondly, what used to be called the Devil Dog, the Melta Cannon, it's just really inconsistent with the number of shots that it has. D3 plus Blast, yeah, you're going to be doing some damage to things like Custodes, but you're just really inconsistent with the number of shots that you're putting out. So maybe if you have like Avatars of Cain or Catan in your local meta where the Melta 4 really comes into play, this can be a tech piece that you can consider every now and then, but by default, you're generally going to be wanting to look at the Inferno Cannon as your go-to gun. Okay, one of the main reasons why you end up seeing the Hellhound taken as often as it is because it has one of the best rules in the guard. In 10th edition, when cover is everywhere, all you need to do is stick a toe right behind the line of sight so that it can't be seen, and everyone has cover all the time. Ignoring cover or preventing your opponent from having cover is functionally an extra point of AP. And we know that an army like Guard that kind of struggles with having a higher AP on a lot of our big damage guns, having that extra AP is crucial. Importantly, flush them out does not require shooting with the main gun. You can do it with the gun that's currently in the hole or even the hunter-killer. And this is part of why we look at heavy bolters in some instances, because a heavy bolter without take aim will hit at least one time 7/8 of the time. Multi-meltas will also do it 3/4 of the time, which is a pretty good ratio. However, if you really need to make sure that you're stripping cover at long ranges, that's where the heavy bolter will shine. It is worth noting that if you're ever thinking about playing Brood Brothers and Gene Stealers, the rule flush them out is not faction locked. A lot of things like this will say everything in the Astra Militarum would gain ignores cover. However, this one does not say that. This removes cover from your opponent. It does not allow the rest of your army to ignore cover. That means that Gene Stealer units could make use of this rule. This comes up with a very natural combination with Withering Hail from the Exterminator and the Fields of Fire stratagem, and this will give dang near everything in your army plus 2 AP and ignores cover. Flush them out, ignores cover. Withering Hail is plus 1 AP, and Fields of Fire also gives you plus 1 AP. And this means that even things like our las guns are AP2 ignoring cover. If you have a hotshot lasgun from a Scion, it's AP3 ignoring cover. And suddenly, that's doing damage to even heavy vehicles and things that have great saves. And pretty much everything in the game will be taking their invulnerable save if they have one. The other major point for the Hellhound is that it is incredibly efficient durability. A Hellhound is toughness 10, 2-up save, and 11 wounds. We compare this to a Lehman Russ chassis, which is toughness 11, 2+ save, and 13 wounds. So it's pretty similar overall. And the main reason why this is so important is because we think of Lehman Russes as these very durable vehicles. But the Hellhound at toughness 10 is very similarly durable. You have to remember that the only strength weapons that will have a difference in their ability to hurt Hellhounds versus Lehman Russes are strength 10 and strength 11 weapons. And strength 10 weapons are, they exist. They're a lot of battle cannons, some autocannons. If you get +1 strength on your Melta guns, Tyranid Synapse melee oftentimes is all strength 10. There's some things in Orcs as well. Like, you can find examples, but it's way more common to find strength 9 weapons. And then strength 11 is very rare. There's only a couple of things in the game that I could think of, and I asked some of my friends to try and come up with more examples. But a Screamer Killer in Synapse range is strength 11. There's Bringer of Flames Sisters Detachment tanks within 12 inches, which doesn't happen all that often. And an Orc character on the Wattern, I think, is also strength 11 sometimes. So the major point here is that most things are either strength 9 or strength 12 plus. And these things are either wounding you on 3s if it's strength 12 plus, or wounding you on 5s if it's strength 9 or less. That means that the vast majority of weapons in the game are going to be wounding Hellhounds and Lehman Russes on the same numbers. And you still have a 2+ save. So with this in mind, knowing that we will only have a couple of weapons in the game, changing what die roll we're going to be wounded on, we have to take a look at how much damage these attacks are going to be doing. Because the real difference between a Lehman Russ and a Hellhound in terms of how durable it is 2 wounds most of the time. Like, this is the most important thing. And if you take a look at all of the more common damage profiles against damage 1 attacks, a Lehman Russ is 18% tankier. It's going to take you 18% more attacks to kill a Lehman Russ than a Hellhound. Against damage 2 attacks, it's 17%. Against damage 3 attacks, it's 25%. But crucially, if we look at some of the Melta weapons, like anything that is a Melta but not within Melta range, you're averaging 3.5 damage per attack, in which case a Hellhound and a Lehman Russ are both going to die in 4 attacks. Whereas something like D6+2, which is the most common Melta weapon that is within Melta range, averaging 5.5, in general, a Lehman Russ is going to survive an entire extra attack on average. Now, these numbers are notable, right? About 20% tankier for a Lehman Russ is not a small margin. However, a Lehman Russ Vanquisher, the cheapest chassis that you can get a Lehman Russ on, is 26% more points than a Hellhound at the time of this recording. A Hellhound is currently 115, and a Vanquisher is 145. And you'll notice that 26% more points is higher than everything except D6+2 weapons on this chart. An Exterminator, which does a very similar role to Hellhounds in a lot of armies, is 32% more points than a Hellhound. And again, that means that per point, you're getting a much more durable vehicle for the Hellhound than you are with any Leman Russ. Now, it's important to note, this is about the durability of the vehicle. This is not about the damage, because every Leman Russ is going to be doing way more damage than a Hellhound. But if you just need something that can stand in front, if you're already looking at bringing something like a Vanquisher and Exterminator, you are nearly as tanky with a Hellhound than you are with these other options. So let's talk about the orders that you generally give to Hellhounds. You generally don't give Hellhounds orders very often. But when you do, the most common one is by far move, 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 because you need to get a certain angle on a target. A Hellhound is already reasonably fast at 10 inches of movement, and so in general, you're going to have a 28-inch threat range with the Inferno Cannon. But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes you need those extra 3 inches to get yourself around a corner in order to draw a line of sight, or in order to make sure that you can shoot a heavy bolter down one range and shoot the Inferno Cannon at another target. That's honestly kind of it. You're going to be giving move, move, move to Hellhounds most of the time if you give them an order at all. However, take aim is also fairly reasonable. If you take a look at the interview I did with Nassim Fouchain, he talks about taking the multi-melta and you make it hit on threes, and then you just have a melta gun, which is pretty good. The other one that you'll do is Duty and Honor, because at an OC3 vehicle, sometimes going to OC4 is really cool because you can score extra points or deny them from your opponent. In terms of stratagems, the ones that you're going to be using way most often with this vehicle are, firstly, Fields of Fire. If you do not have Ursula Creed and you know you're just trying to kill a single target, you're generally use Fields of Fire on the Hellhound itself. The reason for this is once you shoot with the Hellhound, you will then pivot to the Exterminator, which is already AP1. Now it's going to be ignoring cover because of the Hellhound, and it's going to have an AP2 gun because of Fields of Fire. If you do have Creed, you're generally going to want to shoot first with a mortar or infantry or whatever else you have on hand in order to do it for cheaper and have a chance of getting CP back. The other one that you use a lot is Tank Shock. Doing an average of 3.3 mortal wounds is basically a grenade. It's not bad. It's pretty decent to charge when you're charging just about anything. You know, it'll kill a Custodian's Warden on average. It'll kill a Terminator a lot of the time. You're going to be able to do 3 wounds to a vehicle that has a very good save, so charging into like a Land Raider or a Knight is a reasonable way to try and chip off the last couple of wounds. Smokescreen is not bad, but you should generally already have the cover, so if you want to be using this one, it's usually to give you the cover and -1. If you already have cover, it's usually not worth it to spend 1 CP on this. And then Armored Might can be useful if you're getting shot at things like Forge Fiends because they are Strength 10, Damage 3. And so just like we talked about before, Damage 3 will kill you in 4 shots, whereas Damage 2 was going to take 6 to take a Hellhound down. Overwatch is also a pretty good tool with this, but you're going to find that most reasonable opponents are going to be avoiding the Overwatch from the Hellhound just because it's Strength 6 AP2. It's basically an extra shooting phase, so Hellhound is one of the better things in the guard to be using our Overwatches on, but it is competing for Overwatch with Scions and Rogel Thorns in particular. Let's go ahead and close out by talking about the strategy of the Hellhound. So the first one, why do you bring a Hellhound instead of an Exterminator? Well, it relieves the order economy. You generally want to be putting take aim on an Exterminator, but sometimes you don't have an extra squadron order ready to go. So if you are running out of orders and you want to take a tank, but you don't necessarily have the ability to support another tank to increase its damage output, a Hellhound is a totally reasonable way to do it. Next, you're going to want to be splitting fire with your Hellhound most of the time. The Inferno Cannon only really does damage into infantry. Anything toughness 6 or lower, it's actually going to put real damage into because you are automatically hitting for 2d6 attacks. That's pretty reasonably 5 to 6 dead guardsmen, maybe 2 or 3 dead marines, but you're not going to be doing very much damage into things like a Land Raider or a Rogel Thorn or anything with a 2-up save. At the same time, once you take your Inferno Cannon and shoot it at something that you want dead, you're pretty confident that your Heavy Bolter or your Multi-Melta, if you give it take aim, is almost always going to strip the cover of the thing you're shooting it at. So it frees up the main gun to shoot at something else. 7/8 of the time is very likely with a Heavy Bolter, and 3/4 of the time is a little bit less likely with a Multi-Melta, but still likely enough that you can usually count on it, and if you really need something to ignore cover, you can CP reroll to increase these odds even further. The other major reason why you want to be playing Hellhounds is because they support low AP shooters. If you're looking to play Rogel Thorns or Leavenworth's battle tanks in particular, and Exterminators, which all have AP1 and AP2 main guns, pumping up their damage by ignoring cover is a real way to increase the amount of damage that a Hellhound is going to be doing for you by proxy from what else it's going to be making do even more damage. Remember, from what we talked about in the Exterminator video, which I will link on screen. AP3 is the most important breakpoint for AP in the game because it's going to put anything that has an invul save on that invul save, or almost everything. Another reason to generally take Hellhounds is the AP from Withering Hail and the Ignores cover, or functional Ignores cover, coming out from an Exterminator are very close to equivalent. The Ignores cover is slightly worse. And like we said, the Hellhound is almost as durable as a Lehman Russ. However, just as we mentioned before, an Exterminator is going to be doing way more damage than a Hellhound will ever do into most targets. Outside of small chaff and guardsmen and cultists and things like that, the Exterminator will do about as much damage, but the Exterminator will do more damage to just about everything else. However, sometimes you're going to find a situation where it's like, I don't have the extra points, so I can downgrade an Exterminator in order to fit in an extra unit of Catachan. Lastly, just as we talked about in the Lehman Russ video, the Hellhound is the quintessential frontline tank. There's a lot of armies that are going to struggle to punch through a Hellhound just because it's toughness 10. A lot of Melta units are going to be wounding it on 5s, which means that they're not going to be doing as much damage to a Hellhound when they're actually trying to shoot at it. Additionally, toughness 10 is a really nice breakpoint. There's a lot of strength 5 weapons out there in the game, such as bolters, which are now wounding on 6s. And your opponents are going to struggle to kill this. It's really going to take a lot of your opponents by surprise how durable this vehicle really is. However, when you are moving the Hellhound around, make sure that wherever you have it placed, firstly, try and make sure it's in cover all the time. But if something charges or shoots at the Hellhound, you want to be able to shoot back or charge back with your Bulgrin or your Rogel Dorns or your Lehman Russ battle tanks, because your opponent is forced to come into those lines of sight. And remember, of course, don't be afraid of charging Hellhounds into things. Because we have a Torrent weapon as our main weapon, we don't really care that much if we are in a situation where our Hellhound is in combat with an enemy vehicle, as long as it's not going to die. Because we are going to give a -1 or prevent them from falling back and shooting, just because we don't care about being in combat, whereas a lot of our opponent's vehicles will. So that puts us at the end of this. This is a bit of a shorter video just because the Hellhound is not a particularly difficult tank. It is a very durable vehicle. It's a good support platform in order to make sure that the rest of your army is doing as much damage as it possibly can. So just get in there. Try a Hellhound out for yourself. You will generally see that a lot of lists will bring 1 or 2 in competitive 40k because it is so point efficient for the whole that it is bringing. I want to give a shout out once again to the members for joining the channel. If you are interested as well, you can find a button for it down below. Do the like, comment, subscribe thing. It's really cool. Other quick announcements. I've talked about it a little bit, but be on the lookout next week for a list doctor. So if you want to submit a list and get it edited to make sure that you're bringing something strong to your next event, go ahead and keep a lookout for that. I will be doing it for members first, so if you do have a membership, I will make sure to get to the list that you submit. And then next week, I also have a after action report coming for the upcoming Hammer of Wrath GT that I'm going to. Thank you so much everyone for watching, and we'll see you guys all next time. Bye-bye.